bewitched, bothered, and bewildered.
It's my pleasure. Welcome back to the show. Thomas E. Woods. He is the author of the new book, Meltdown, a free market, why the stock market collapsed, the economy tanked, and government bailouts will make things worse. And he edited and wrote the introduction to The Betrayal of the American Right by Murray Rothbard. Wow, that's a good one, too. Welcome back to the show, Tom. How are you doing?
Scott, glad to be with you.
And I'm sorry, what are you, senior fellow at the Ludwig von Mises Institute?
That's right.
Okay. Now, speaking of which, I got a PDF file in front of me called The Neglected Costs of the Warfare State, an Austrian tribute to Seymour Melman. It's at Mises.org/journals/scholar/woods2.pdf. That ain't so bad. I think we'll link right to it in the blog entry for this. Who was Seymour Melman?
Well, this matters. This is not just some obscure guy. This matters. Seymour Melman was an unjustly neglected figure. In his day, he was acknowledged by some people on the left. He was a professor of industrial engineering and operations research at Columbia University. But what he was known for was his studies of what the military economy does to a society. That it's one thing to say, and it's very important to say, that war itself has social effects, economic effects, political effects. But also his argument was the preparation for war. So even the so-called peacetime, if we ever actually have that in American history, it also distorts human relationships, distorts the economy, and his critique, I think you can get a sense of it just from the title of one of his books, Pentagon Capitalism, gives you some idea of who this guy is. And incidentally, an easy way to get to this paper I did about him and what he has to say, because it's so important. We're living with these consequences of the military state. It's just, I linked to it at my website at tomwoods.com on the articles page. I think it's the second to last one, called, as you say, Neglected Cause of the Warfare State.
Awesome. And by the way, how's Meltdown doing? Is he still on the New York Times bestseller list with this thing?
No, but it was a good 10 weeks. We had a good ride with the thing, yeah.
Right on. And I just want to, in case we don't ever, get a chance to get back to it in this interview, I cannot recommend a book about anything economics more highly than this Meltdown. You take basically everything that people need to know about the current economic crisis, how it got this way and what to do about it, and you incorporate every single argument against your own position and take them all head on. This isn't, you don't bring up a bunch of straw men and red herrings. Every single thing that I could think of as a challenge and say, oh yeah, Tom, well what about this? All of that is in here too. All of it. It's called Meltdown. It's at your bookstores right now. Go and get it. All right, now, back to this warfare state thing here. We have a permanent warfare economy in this country. Some of the first stuff I learned about politics was that since World War II, the military state has never ended. And that our entire economy now, it's like Bill Hicks said, and George Carlin too, they told us the truth. Our entire economy would collapse. The entire structure of our society would collapse if we had the slightest understanding of what's really going on here and tried to do something about it.
Well, the interesting thing is that this paper of mine you mentioned that is going to be published soon, but as I say, there's this unpublished version you can read. This is one of the things I'm the happiest with that I've done ever in my entire writing career, is this paper, because it's stuff that if you believe in the free market, or if you're just against corporatism, you're just against the cozy relationship between big business and big government, that to add insult to injury is carried out beneath this banner of the common good and national defense and all these wonderful sounding things, then I think you're going to be very interested in what this paper has to say, because what I'm bringing to light are all the ways in which we've already seen our economy deformed. Like, for example, during the Cold War, we had maybe 2/3 of our technical research scientists diverted from what would normally be the pursuit of research for commercial purposes, to make our lives better, to make them easier. Instead, their labor was diverted to weapons research, weapons production. And this is not it's not the case that there's an infinite supply of geniuses who can carry out R&D work. If 2/3 of these people are engaged in building a better missile, then that means those people can't also be building better transit. They can't also be researching better consumer products. That's all gone by the wayside. So number one,
I would say that transformation is almost complete too. I know scientists who've complained that there's just no work other than going to work for the government, and almost all of that is military-industrial complex stuff. Otherwise, go run a garden shop or something. You're not going to be able to use your degree.
No, that's right. And there are two other points I want to make with that. One is that where you're draining these people away from the private sector simply because the public sector can afford to pay them higher salaries, because it can just grab the money from the taxpayer or print it up or whatever. Private sector finds it very hard to compete with that. And secondly would be the transformation of our university system into basically a giant wing of the Department of Defense, basically. Because if you look at, and that's, I hate the Orwellian name Department of Defense, as if this has anything to do with defending anybody. Obviously it's Department of Offense, but regardless, if you look at what's happened to our universities, to MIT, for example, and then on down Stanford, and you look at different departments, whole fields, and the way they're taught, and the types of students who have been admitted, and the type of research that's done, and the research angles that students are taught to take up, they're all governed by military priorities, or to an absurd degree.
And that's something actually that Ike Eisenhower brought up specifically in his farewell address, was the corruption of the university curriculum there. And by the way, as a little parentheses about the Department of Defense, they didn't name it that until America became an outright NSC 68 empire. Right. And then they renamed it the Department of Defense. It was always the War Department before that.
Well, that's right. So you have to love that. I mean, there's obviously, these things don't happen by accident. Another thing that's interesting to me is how apparently private firms become deformed and distorted by their relationship with the Pentagon. When you get into a relationship in which the Pentagon is your biggest customer, basically, or even in some cases your only one, that affects your business model, affects the way you run your business, because the Pentagon, sure, at some level, they care about costs. I mean, if you're going to produce something that costs $10 quintillion, well, they can't pay that. But beneath that, basically, cost is not the most important thing to the Pentagon. If they need the money, they'll get it one way or another. What matters to them is, are you easy to work with? Can you deal with constant changes in the design? Whatever. Cost is really subordinate to that. So instead of being a cost-minimizing firm where you want to keep your costs low, these become cost-maximizing firms. And so that when they go back, if ever, to being normal firms on the free market, they don't even know how to compete anymore. They have no idea how to function in a market economy. For example, the machine tool industry in the U.S. was a very, very important industry, dominated the world up to the 1960s. Then the Pentagon became the number one customer. And suddenly you saw the American machine tool industry it suddenly became incredibly uncompetitive. And so when, for example, the big thing was something called numerical control machine tool technology, American firms did produce it, but they produced it at a price no business could possibly afford. It was the Japanese and the Germans who produced it at realistic prices. But again, when all that matters is, hey, the Pentagon is going to buy this stuff from me, these things, normal cost-cutting measures that you would obviously be normally under pressure to undertake, are just swept by the wayside. I mean, these are sicknesses, deep-seated sicknesses in our economy that are by and large not discussed, and we have economists who supposedly are for the free market and they're libertarians, supposedly they claim to be, or especially the ones who are conservatives. Of course they're never going to mention this because this is the one big government program they like, so they don't want to cast it in a bad light.